Welcome. Hey everyone, it's good to see you. All right, how was everyone's estuary? All right, so any thumbs down? All right, no thumbs down, so that's good so far. All right, I was told by Dave that we were going to talk about the book of Job, which I'm great with. Just like an introduction, my name is Jess, Purviance. I'm from Kansas City. I've kind of been involved in the estuary stuff for a little while now, for several years. And part of my experience with all of this has been the book of Job. It's been extremely meaningful for me. And not only that, but these two people sitting here with me, I have talked to more than any people in the world about Job. So Shari and I, we have a YouTube podcast that we did a few years ago that is still out there, but people still come up to me and talk to me about it. And my interaction with Shari and talking about it, the book of Job with her, has been so fruitful. And then Yosef and I have been going back and forth about the Hebrew roots of all these words and the different ways it connects with the rest of the text of the Bible. And I'm just super grateful to be up here with these two, because this is actually kind of amazing. So that's me. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Yosef Rizen. I've also been around here for many, many years. But this is my first time really being in person. So this is really cool. And before I started talking to Jess and watched Jess and Shari's streams on Job, it was just like another book of the Bible. I mean, I read it a couple times through. It's very, very long. And Jess will introduce the book for those of you who maybe aren't quite as familiar with it. But getting through those 42 chapters is something, and I had never really delved in. And then I think you guys really pushed me to take another look at the book and go way deeper.
Check. Okay, good. I'm Shari. I did the Book of Job with Jess. I was really grateful to him for all the hours we spent together. Jess did all the work. I just showed up and said, "Oh, have you ever thought about that? This reminds me of this, and I have a story for that." So I'm really curious to see how this conversation goes. I'm always curious about how conversations evolve. I think that's the greatest part about having one. And so I'm totally unprepared.
Which is how she always likes to be. All right. Let me just introduce the book of Job just briefly. It's a very complicated, beautiful, old book. And when I say complicated, I mean it's very complex. There's a lot of levels to it. And so you could just talk about it forever. I have, or I'm trying to.
You are. Not have. You are.
And now I'm here on stage and you're just encouraging me, and all right. But this whole type of conversation kind of sprang out of this community, Paul VanderKlay. We met each other because of what Paul did, and so really thanks to him for making these kind of conversations possible. So let's get into it. So the book of Job is, you may know a little bit about it. It's about a man named Job who's righteous and blameless, and he ends up these disasters befall him, and it's not just random. God actually brings these disasters on him. He loses all of his family, his wealth, and is even stricken with sickness. And so that all happens in the first 2 chapters of a 42 chapter book. You're like, oh, this is a bad way to start. And then the middle part of the book is poetic dialogues between him and his friends of trying to sort this out, and really it it is an example of conversation. It's not necessarily the best example because they get pretty heated and accusatory, and they're not exactly helpful friends to him. But what happens in the middle part of the book is very beautiful, but it's not necessarily systematic or nicely ordered. So a lot of people will start reading the poetic part, the poetic discourses between Job and his friends, and they'll just get bogged down and be like, I don't even know what they're talking about anymore. It just sounds like all the same stuff. But eventually, in the end, God answers, and God speaks for 4 chapters, which is the longest speech by God in the whole Bible. So that's significant. And it's also one of the major sort of creation narratives of the Bible. You know about the ones in Genesis, possibly, but Job 38 through 41 is also another one of these, where God speaks of his creation. And then in the end, Job is restored. And a lot of people are kind of like, what was that all about? Job gets his wealth back. He has his family again. And the question is like, what is this all about? And some of it is about suffering. Some of it is about the inexplicable. Some of it is about just this sort of place we find ourselves as finite people. And so what we're going to kind of try to discuss here now is Job as the mediator, or as mediator. And so I think it's fitting with the Estuary, the Estuary conference that we're doing, because a mediator is a go-between, and like, how do you bridge the gap between one person and another, or even there's this gap, and like how to bridge that. And then the book of Job's actually concerned with, how do you bridge the gap between me and God when God is apparently gone, not only gone, but has done this evil to him. And so what ends up happening, well, let me just tell you a couple instances of mediation, and that should start kicking off the conversation. So there's some instances of mediation in the book of Job, where in the very first chapter, it's told that he has this wonderful family. They have these feasts, and at the end of the feast, Job thinks to himself, what if my children curse God in their hearts? So I interpret this to mean that there's not necessarily an outward sign of any sin, but inwardly, he's not sure. He's like, they could curse God in their heart. He doesn't know, so he offers sacrifices on their behalf. So he's continually doing these sacrifices, just on the off chance that his kids may have cursed God in their heart. And so already you see this mediation set up where, you're unsure of what's in the heart of the other person. And so he's trying to negotiate this, and he's not sure exactly God's relationship with them. And so he's doing these sacrifices in order to mediate this. And then the disasters strike, and his children are killed. So effectively, his mediation has been insufficient or wrong, or something happened that his mediation didn't account for. So that's one instance of mediation. There's another instance where his friends come. So after all the disasters happen, his 3 friends from far away, they travel to meet him, to comfort him. And they're not, when it says comfort, it's not necessarily a psychological comforting, like, we got to make sure you're okay. It's basically there to get the person back into their life again. So he's sitting down on an ash heap in the dust, clothes torn, sick and not well. And his friends come to basically try to comfort him, restore him, mediate for him. And it doesn't happen. His friends come with the wisdom of the time. They come with a systematic religious wisdom in some parts. They come with visions and dreams, and they try to talk to him to restore him, and he won't have any of it. He none of it satisfies him, and he will not allow. He won't lie about it. He doesn't have anything to lose, and so he when his friends say, "Oh, God's trying to correct you. You did something wrong," he's like, "What did I do wrong?" And they can't answer him because he was actually righteous and blameless. And so he says, "You guys are wrong. You guys are absolutely wrong." And then they start to accuse him, and they say, "Well, this is proof of your wickedness, and this is the proof of the wrong things you've done." And so they act as sort of they're trying to be religious mediators. They're trying to be prophetic. They're trying to be they're preaching to him, and that fails. And so we have these failures of mediation that happen along the way, and this leads Job to desire a mediator between him and God. Effectively, he was hoping his friends could maybe do it for him, but he's like, God is now distant. He was close to me. He's now far away from me. He's hidden. He's in the darkness. I don't know what he's doing. So in his mind, he dreams up this scenario of basically a judicial situation where the men of the gate would gather together and they would sort out their differences. And he's like, "Oh, if only I could get God to come to the gate." But throughout the course of the middle part of the book, I mean, we're talking tens of chapters, God doesn't show up. And so he sort of is lamenting this fact. He's like, God isn't here. I wish there was a mediator. I wish there was some way to arbitrate this situation. And it appears that all of this is sort of doomed for failure as well. But Job is sort of he won't take no for an answer, so he keeps going at it. And eventually he makes his case, and he makes it final. And this is before a fourth friend shows up to give the longest speech of the book. The fourth friend speaks longer than God, which is hilarious. But, well, let's start here. These failures in mediation are very human. It's a human problem that we all have. And I don't even know what question to ask at this point, but is there anything that you can, that any of this brings up for you, Yosef or Shari?
Yosef, you go first. I saw you making some raised eyebrows and furrowed forehead.
Fair enough. Okay, so in some ways, I do think that there are a lot of parallels in the way the book's framing the first two chapters and the final chapter, but especially the first two chapters really set up the rest of the book. There's kind of a classical academic argument that like they're added later, but neither of us accept that because they really do set up the book, and you see the same patterns throughout the book from those chapters. They kind of continue throughout, and in some ways, and maybe I'll kind of take my usual kind of anti-position is like that in some ways it's a book about not needing mediators, right? It's in some ways like Job shouldn't necessarily have been doing the sacrifices for his children. In some ways the friends shouldn't have been there, or at least shouldn't have spoken, right? We can talk about in many ways the book is the inverse of the Elijah story, because for Elijah, right, God is not in the tempest, he's not in the fire, he's not in the wind, he's in the still small voice or whatever. He has to come out of the cave to hear God's voice. The book of Job is the inverse, where God is silent and Job takes that silence as absence, but it's not. And like God, and Job is convinced that God is not there, that God is hidden. He can't access him. He just wishes God would hear him. And his friend, even his friends who are wrong in many ways, at least one of them tells him, like, no, God is here the whole time. Like, even if you're not aware of it, like, God's been here with you. But there's something beyond that, which is interesting, which is before the friends spoke, they sit with Job in silence for a week, right? And I do think it's psychological in many ways, that they are there mourning with him, waiting for him to speak. And right, they don't speak until he speaks first. They don't break the silence. And in some ways, their silence, but still sitting with him, is very much the same way that God is sitting with him in silence through the whole book, until chapter 37 or whatever. So there is something, and as much, right, as the book is often taken as a book about theodicy and like how does God, work, and Satan, and evil, and how do we explain all these things, and like, do we find an answer in God's speech or not, or Elihu's speeches? In many ways, that's not really what the book's about, right? And to me, it's kind of like the red herring of the book. The book is really about how do you relate to another person who's in pain, and where the friends fail is not in their knowledge as much as in their inability to relate properly. And there's kind of an interesting question over how does, both God and the friends sit in silence with Job. Job does not react well to the friends' speeches. He does not react well to God's silence. He does react well to his friend's silence, and he doesn't react well to he does react well to God's speech. So there's kind of an inversion there. And how we relate to God and man in these really different ways, and because we can feel when someone's sitting with us, even in silence, we know they're there, and that is not necessarily the case for an invisible God, right? Like that, and there's a very, like, how do you know God is there in the silence is a big question of the book.
Part of what Job wants is knowledge. He wants the knowledge of, if there was anything I did wrong, let me know. Right. And so the silence is keeping him from that, and the language of being clouded and not being able to see and not being able to know where God is all this sort of like, I need some information. I need something so I know where I am or what's going on. It's a complete lack or loss of purpose and a complete loss of direction. And like, what do what happens when you're in that space? And it seems like Job is doing that. He's like forging ahead through the thickets with the machete. There's no path yet, and Job is sort of forging that.
I'm just kind of chuckling to myself because we have three people reading the same book and we all have a different perspective. So that should tell you a little something about it. Although I agree with everything you guys said, but we're coming from the place where we are when we read Job. And I think two things that you didn't mention that I think are really important is that the book begins with God calling Job righteous, and it ends with God calling Job righteous. So for me, those are the bookends, and the library is in between, right? The rest of the library of the story. And the second thing that I find really interesting about Job and always intrigued me was that Satan is wandering around in the halls of heaven, and God bumps into him and says, "Hey, what are you up to today?" And he says, "I don't know, looking for people to torture." That's my job. And God says, "Okay, well, I got a guy. Have you seen," he says, "my servant Job?" God points Job out.
God's always causing trouble. To
Satan, okay? And he says, you can do these things, but just don't kill him. Don't kill him. So, and I just know for myself, when I read that for the first time, like intentionally, like not just listening to a sermon, but myself reading it, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. So a righteous man is going to be destroyed by Satan because God pointed him out. I'm not going to say anything else. Just let that sink in, okay? So, and then something else that I just thought would be interesting to add is that there's a dialogue, and we are in estuary groups having dialogues. And the main body of the book of Job is about conversation and what that conversation actually, if you could imagine it, what that would look like from a spiritual perspective. And it looks like a whirlwind in the book of Job. And it's from that whirlwind that God speaks. So I'm not going to expand on that much more either. I'm just going to say, let that sink in.
So I'm going to make a small... It doesn't say Satan's looking to torture people, right? He's just... I
was being comedic.
Okay. Because this is not that Satan. He's just wandering in some way, right? So he's just... In fact, it uses not just wandering. He's walking with. It's that same walking with God word that we get. It's like a weird reflexive walking with. It's not... So, and the fact that it's used with Satan specifically, and he's walking with the earth, is a very kind of interesting, weird thing.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful.
But, and it's actually, it was just Rosh Hashanah, which is the day that this, in theory, occurred, according to the Midrash, where that the day that God summons all the angels to report what they've been up to, and like it's also like there's, in some ways, it's the day that humanity continuously like comes before God, and like in the test of Job in some sense for us. So he's it's very pertinent. But it is interesting because you say it when the Satan comes at the beginning of the book, and he says like God points out Job, and he says like look how righteous he is. He's great. He does all the right things. He's has integrity. And later we hear all the great things. There's this negative confession that Job does. I don't know what chapter it is, Jess can tell us, that where he says like all the things that he's done to take care of his community, and he's like, really is a stand-up guy, and then Satan says like, so yeah, of course he acts good. Like, look, you've given him all this wealth, you've given him these children, you have this house. In many ways, Satan says like, or I shouldn't say Satan, the Satan says that yeah, this kind of very mechanistic, religious, systematized, worldview that the friends believe in, right? The friends are going to come back to Job later and say, this is the world. Like Satan says, that is how you've been treating Job. You've been treating him like in this very, like he does good, you do good back. Of course he's like happy and does all the good things that you want him to do. That's not going to be a surprise. So in some ways, this is not that system doesn't happen, right? And there's a tendency to say, like in your conversations, there was like, that's just the wrong worldview. But in fact, that isn't the wrong worldview at the beginning of the book. It is how the world has worked up to this point in time. Mm-hmm. And the book is trying to show that there's like a meta view beyond, that's...
Could I add something here?
Please.
Because, so what's interesting about that I've thought about is that the first thing a child learns from a very young age, and I know this because one of my children was severely burnt, is cause and effect. Mm-hmm. So they understand that if they touch something hot, it burns them, right? And so the next time they go towards that thing, they will quickly, pull away. That's a very rudimentary lesson that we learn. And that is, to me, what the friends and Job and the worldview that they live in is. It's a cause and effect thing. If you do good things will happen. If you do bad things will happen. And so, and you're so intimidating sitting there. Yosef. I'm going to try to ignore you.
Okay.
But anyway, what I think God's speech does is he scrambles those eggs. That's what it feels like to me, right? They've got this like really rudimentary cause and effect, which I think is a normal human reaction to being in the world. But you have to stay alive. So don't eat the red berries. Don't step too close to the edge. Right? Things happen. But God comes in and he scrambles that up. And I mean, for me personally, the first interaction with the Satan that God has scrambled my eggs. Okay.
Well, God even says, like, so he interacts with the Satan, the accuser, twice. And the first time he destroys all of Job's wealth and family. And God's response is, look at Job. He's blameless and righteous. And you enticed me to destroy him without reason. And already, like, if it isn't enough that God's allowing the Satan to do these things, he then says, all of this is for no reason at the very beginning. And not only that, it's all happening because he's blameless and righteous.
Right.
It's compounding all sorts of problems on top of one another.
Yeah. And like you said, Jess, and this is a part where I get choked up, because Job says to God when he realizes, okay, let's make this an indictment. Okay, I'm guilty of something. Please indict me, God. And the killer thing for me is he says, I will wear it like a crown. But there isn't one. There is no indictment on Job. But that's who he is. That's the thing that makes Job Job, is that he would wear that crown. He would wear that indictment as a crown. Okay? But even that should be scrambling your eggs, like, yeah. And then something else I'll just throw in here is that God uses nature, creation, to show who he is, because at the end of his speech, Job says, I have heard of you, but now I have seen you. So, and to me, I'll just say this one last thing. What God is showing Job through nature, and then I'll finish my thought, is that this is a complex, dynamical system, okay? And that's cause and effect doesn't cut it here, because you don't know where this is coming from. And then the key to the book of Job is chapter 28, which is the book of wisdom. And in there, we come to understand that wisdom is not something you can see with your eyes. It's not something that the eagle, it's not a path that the eagle can find. I can't remember it all, Jess, but you dig down for it, you don't find it, all the things. So anyway, I just wanted to add those thoughts.
Yeah, right in the middle of the book is a chapter 28. It's just a poem on wisdom, and it comes right after. Basically, Job gives this fiery, like if there's like a hellfire and brimstone speech, he gives it in 27 to his friends, and then all of a sudden you have this nice poem on wisdom immediately after it.
It's kind of like a musical interlude. Yeah,
it's like intermission right after the fire and brimstone speech. And the like Shari was saying, like, it asks, where is wisdom found? And it talks about men going into the earth. Unlike any other animals, they go down to try to find jewels and gold and precious things. And the question it's asked in the chapter is, where can wisdom be found? And at the end, it just says that God knows the way.
Yeah. So quite a couple of things. One, so the fire and brimstone chapter, in some ways, is Job is crying in pain, right? Like that is a very painful chapter to read. That 27, 26 and 27, where he basically says his friends have by
His friends have become enemies.
His friends have become the enemies by doing their little estuary, but like it's like the most failed estuary ever, right? Like it's a really model of like what not to do in estuary, where they gang up on him, and like they make him feel even worse and worse, and like trying to figure out like they're trying to find the wisdom, they're trying to figure out his story, they're trying to figure out like I'll put all the pieces together, but somehow what emerges is just making everything worse for him, right? And before like. They were trying to comfort him. They had the silence. They tried to give him wisdom. At this point, he's like, just like stop. Like he like almost like curses them basically. Right?
He calls them wicked. So they have been accusing him, and now he's like, "You're the wicked ones."
It is. So like it is, and that's really important for the final mediation chapter, right? Because what they do to him is the thing that the one time we have like real mediation in the book that matters. Is like they've caused him pain and he has to forgive them.
Yeah, well,
we have to get to that, but we'll get that later. That's at the end of the book. Chapter 28. And then after 28, we get 29, right, or 30, right? Elihu, right, comes on, and he's like,
he comes in 31,
31,
or 32.
Okay. So Elihu comes back, and what's so interesting about the Elihu speech that this came out when I was watching your. Hold on, wait a second. In Job 9, Job has already said, God has crushed me with a storm. Right? In 9, he already understands the storm and he thinks he's heard of God, right? I mean, like in that's the here, I've heard of you, right? Like he's crushed and he's done, right? Like everything's lost, killed. The first friend's already given a speech that makes him feel a little bit bad, trying to help him. He's not wicked yet, but he doesn't feel great. And in 9, he says, "You've crushed me with the storm," but then we get another storm, right? This is like the second. This is also there's a lot of doubling in the book, right? So you have the doubling with the Satan, you have the doubling of a lot of the language, but here you get where God comes back in a storm. But that storm, Elihu weaves it into his speech, right? So the clouds like Elihu points out, the clouds are gathering, they're getting darker. Throughout his speech, and we can talk about whether Elihu is good or bad, and there's a whole debate about that we've had before. But like part of this is Elihu helps Job see God in the storm, I think. He helped because before it was just like Job never thinks anyone else is punishing him but God, right? Job is one of the strictest monotheists in the Bible, right? He never says there's a Satan, there's another angel, there's some persecuting principality. It's always from God. He knows that he's being punished, like it's always from God. And he's not wrong, but like it's fascinating because he's not necessarily a Jewish character. We didn't talk about that element, but like he's clearly set up, even though it's probably written by a Jew. Like the book he's not a Jewish character. He's a very strict monotheist, though. He seems to be set up as one of the other descendants of from Abraham's other kids from Keturah, his second concubine, and I think Elihu does help him see God in the storm and in the silence and in like that he was in the punishment or in the chaos or in the scrambling or whatever you want to call all that stuff. He helps him see him in that, and he does it very slowly and kind of deliberately by pointing out this gathering storm in his speech, right? So by the time you get to God's speech, Job can see God. Couldn't see him in the storm before in the same way, and now he can. And it's like this renewal.
Sorry.
Yes, no, you really want to hit back here. So
well, okay, so just so everyone knows, so like Job gives his final statement about the indictment that Shari was talking about. He's like, I want an indictment, and he doesn't quite know what he's asking for, and this is how Job ends, and it then says the words of Job are ended, and then you're like, all right, here comes God, right? And then it's Elihu for 6 chapters. You're like, who is this? It's just this new character out of the blue. There's a lot of debate about him, but I kind of view him as someone that's trying to synthesize everything that's happened so far in the speeches. So he's trying to bring everything together. He kind of gives a long introduction to himself. He seems a little bit kind of boastful and prideful. He gives his little synthesis. I don't think he's doing anything amazing, but then the last part of his speech, I think his role there is just to point out that there's a storm coming. And there, my view of it is he's kind of this arrogant young guy who's pretty smart, does this synthesis that's not really answering the question, and he kind of runs out of steam, but all he can see is the storm coming, and so he just starts talking about it as it rolls in. He kind of loses his composure a bit, and is like, how can we stand before this? How can, who's going to give us the words to say? And then immediately after that, God shows up, and we can just talk. So I think Elihu is sort of another one of these failed mediators. He was trying to synthesize. He was trying to bring things together from Job's point of view and the friends, because it says at the beginning that Elihu's angry with both Job and his friends, and he's trying to do this synthesis. But his role ends up being played out as just the one that talks about the coming storm. So we get this building up of suspense, and it's coming in. He's almost like a John the Baptist character. He's like the one that is preparing the way. And well, then God shows up, and God provides this sort of successful mediation, and it's mediated through nature. It's through the world, and it's not systematic. It actually has. People think that God's basically trying to yell at Job and crush him, but God's already crushed him, so he doesn't need to do that again. What I think is happening is something a little bit more nuanced and sophisticated, which is
and loving. And
you could see this in the way God describes things, especially in the first. So he speaks for 4 chapters, and in the first 2 chapters, it's just littered with language about mothers, fathers, even like midwifery. So when he talks about the sea, he talks about the sea being born, and then God wrapping it up with clouds like swaddling, like you would a newborn. And we haven't, like, throughout the whole book, no one has talked like this. No one has talked like in the language of this love, but it's this sort of awful love, like awe-inspiring. It's not small. It's exactly how the world and nature is to us, which is sort of, sometimes it's overwhelming, sometimes it's very scary, sometimes it's destructive, but it's also our home. The sea has boundaries where God says, here's how far you can go and no further. And so there's, so when God comes in, this mediation is done through the natural world, through his speech. And I find that incredible.
I don't know that I'd say, Elihu so here's slight pushback. I don't think I'd say Elihu was a failed mediator, but he's not the final mediator, right? Or in the sense of there is no final mediator. Sorry, there's no final mediator, right? Like just Job and God. Like there is no mediator. That's like ultimately part, like what I was saying. But Elihu does act as he's not the final person that Job has to talk to, but he sets up, in some ways he does mediate because he sets up the right perspectival kind of space for Job to encounter God, even if he can't be the one who offers the final wisdom. He can't be the one who gives the golden jewels. He doesn't have that wisdom. None of the humans have that wisdom. Not even God's not going to reveal that wisdom at some level, right? But he does set the final space in his synthesis. And yeah, look, he's kind of like the guy, and he shows up to Estuary. He doesn't know what's going on. He's never met any of the people before. He comes a little late, and he's like, right, like he's the young guy who like thinks but he's like trying to do his best. He's trying to put together all the things. He's trying to make sense of like what these friends have been saying in a way that isn't as painful. It's maybe not coming from the same place of love as the God speech, but Job does not need to pray or mediate or fix, his relationship with Elihu. Right? He's excluded from that in the end because he didn't cause the same pain. Maybe because he's not a friend already, so he can't cause the same pain. But also, I think his speech is different. Like he doesn't blame Job in the same way that the friends do, and because he doesn't know the protocol in some sense. So like there's something there. Right? So I don't want to like be as negative on Elihu because I do think there is a role, even for that new person who doesn't know what's going on, but he's still able to kind of pick up that like. And I don't read him as boastful as you do, I think, but like I think like there is, I think part of his humility at the beginning is true humility, where he's like, I don't know what's going on here, but like I think I see something, and I just want to like put in my comment.
He does say someone with true wisdom is now here with you.
Wait, but do you think it's him or God?
I think he was referring to himself, but
okay.
I don't know, maybe.
I don't know. It's not as clear to me. I think there's a little bit of ambiguity there.
Could I ask you a question? Because I've always wondered if Elihu was there for the benefit of the reader and not for the benefit of Job. Because he kind of acts like a narrator, right? Where he goes over the whole complexity. That's why probably it's so long, just a guess. And he does have to be kind of arrogant in order to do such a thing, right? Where, it would seem that he's standing, on the outside and he shows up like some Shakespearean, Horatio or something, kind of little hot under the collar and, and says, okay, I've been watching. This is how it went. This is what I think. And did you see that storm coming? Something like that. So, yeah. I don't know what the Hebrew.
I could hear that.
You could hear that? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there is something to, right? I mean, to keep using my like little metaphor here of like the person who he didn't jump into the conversation at the beginning. He like maybe didn't feel comfortable, but like now that he's been there long enough, and he's been there a very long time, right? Many, many, many chapters now, through many rounds of conversation, he now finally feels like he can speak up, and he's sort of able to take that external, objective, like third person perspective, which maybe also helps him not be as painful because he's kind of an outside voice. But so there's something to that where you go from second person to third person back to second person, right? Where like you needed to kind of get that space in order to kind of see what's going on and then come back into the conversation. And maybe he provides Job that space because, Job's words were ended. Like Job didn't know what else to say. He was stuck, right? And the friends were stuck. Like it was a failed meeting. They had nothing else to say to each other. They couldn't figure it out. And Elihu was able to push past that in a way, in his not perfect and maybe boastful and young and maybe arrogant, but with energy and anger and like all those things. He's not a perfect mediator in any way. No. In some ways, he's not the angel that Job's looking for. And he isn't really the mediator in some sense, but like he's like the meta mediator. I don't know what you call it. Like he sets up the space that allows Job to come in and have that conversation with God. And it is a conversation, right? God speaks most of it, but Job does respond. There's an actual real dialogue in those chapters. It's not just God monologuing for 4 chapters or whatever. Like Job gets space to respond, and he doesn't really know what to say, right? I mean, obviously, like, what do you say to God? But like, there is something there where there is a new space opened after the wisdom poem, after, we're told that there's no, man is on this quest to find wisdom. He's never going to get the answer. He's never going to look, that propositional knowledge is never going to be exactly what he wants. And the mediator he wants isn't like, or whatever you want to call it. He's mediator. The mediator is Elihu is not what he wants either, but like he does get there, in a sense. But what really is ultimately is right. We haven't talked. Maybe I don't know what our time. What's our time like? What time is it?
We got like 10 minutes.
Oh gosh. Okay, we actually used. We did it. So why don't we talk about the end of the book a little bit?
Yeah. How do you view the speech of God, and then why does this? So after the speech of God, it says that Job is comforted, which you think back to the beginning, like the friends came to comfort him. And they were unable to, like, throughout this whole thing. And then all of a sudden God speaks, and then it says Job was comforted, and not necessarily just to get back to life, but he was comforted where he was in the dust and ash. But I wanted, do you have anything to add about the speech of God, or?
Can I just say, I don't have much, but because I think it's from, God speaks from, about, he's descriptive of the way nature acts and interacts with itself. And he's illustrating how complex and dynamical it is. Like just to use the ostrich example, he's basically saying that the ostrich is a really crappy mother. She lays her eggs on the sand and just abandons them. They get fried in the sun and taken by predators, you know. But then he says, but look how beautiful she can run. Look how fast she can run. And you're like, wait a minute.
God says her creator
matter?
didn't give her any wisdom.
Yeah. Does that matter when you've neglected your children? You know? But somehow it does. Somehow it matters. I don't know how to order that. And so and Job at the same time throughout the book is having insight from nature. So and my favorite example is, he says, but I've seen an old stump sprout, a new, tree coming out of a dead old stump. And I've always understood that as Job sees resurrection. He sees life after death. And for the friends, there is no such thing. And so they just assure him that no, he's never seen that. And they just rip the old stumps out and throw them in the fire. And that's the end of it. But what's speaking to Job before he speaks to God is nature. And then what God speaks back to him is nature. And there they resonate. There they come together. And I think that's why Job is comforted. Because all of the things that he thought he realized from nature, God confirmed. It's not obvious why the ostrich is a bad mother, but she can run really fast and she's really beautiful. It's not obvious why a new life sprouts out of a dead thing, but there it is, right? So these are, Anyway, I'll just leave it at that. So,
I don't think Job actually believes in personal resurrection, because he says it. He says he doesn't earlier at one point in the book. But I do think that I don't think he believes in personal, like soul, like individual resurrection. Because he says somewhere else in the book that he doesn't, which is kind of a complicating point. But like there is, I do think, and like the book, whenever it was written, the time when like we have it from and when it makes sense too, is it's understood as this metaphor for the returning exiles from Babylon, right? They've been destroyed, and they've been in the wilderness and in that ash heap, and they have not gotten answers, and they've tried all these kind of look through different theodicies. You can look at Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, right? There's various theodicies, but then they're still able to rebuild the second temple. And to me, like that, I think that is that type of resurrection, this kind of national resurrection, is very tied into kind of how the book is used and kind of how it's read very early on. But I'm not convinced necessarily that he believes in like personal resurrection, but I think it's a national, like communal resurrection. And in some ways, that's what happens at the end of the books, which we haven't really talked about yet, because this is, God says, your friends have not spoken properly or correctly or smoothly, right?
But just to quickly interrupt, I didn't say that he saw personal resurrection. And also, he was resurrected. His personal life was resurrected.
Right. In some sense. His kids are not.
No, but he was restored.
He's restored, right?
Yeah.
So it's a metaphorical resurrection, right? And he does, I think we can agree on that. Yeah. God says, like, your friends need someone to like bring us, they need to bring a sacrifice, and you need to pray for them.
Can I stop still real fast?
Yeah.
So God's not happy with the friends, and so he says, Job, will you mediate for them? And I didn't realize this until recently, but basically Job is asked to do the thing that he didn't get. Like, he desired a mediator. He desired someone to help him. And he ends up getting this direct interaction with God, which is overwhelming and awful in an awe-inspiring way. But he never gets the mediator to solve his dilemma. And then he's asked to do that for his friends. And this is, well, I think it's just a beautiful scene in the book, is where he offers the prayer for the friends in order to restore them to God.
But I think in part he can't have a mediator because he's never sinned. And
Yeah.
you only get a mediator. You can, in the sense of the friends need Job to pray for them because they hurt him. So he has to be the one who forgives them to the point where he will pray on their behalf, right? Like that's not just like, okay, I forgive you, bye, whatever. It's like, I forgive you so deeply that I want not only my relationship with you to be restored, but God's relationship with you to be restored, right? It's a very deep level of forgiveness that he is now called upon to kind of do, but it only happens because they hurt him. And since he is sinless, he hasn't hurt anyone. There's no human at this point that he can appeal to. There's no need for one, right? He just can talk to God. Like, that's the only person or being, whatever, left for him to talk to. And this gets right to the point of, like, if you sin against someone directly, but that's why he couldn't mediate for his children. They didn't sin against him, right? Like, there was no, like, he was not, we can talk about priestly roles and stuff like that, and we're at the end of our time, but like, he thought of himself as a priest and he wasn't, and they hadn't sinned against him. And if there's anything in their heart, it was between them and God. And like, he thought he had a role there, and he really didn't in some way.
Yeah. I think to kind of just wrap this up, I just would like to point out, like, one thing that I think is really important about this book is that the thing that guides Job forward is not necessarily a systematic, a system. It wasn't necessarily he didn't necessarily have any rules that he was trying to follow. He just wouldn't betray his own integrity, and he was sort of led forward by his own sense of what he needed, which is very messy. It's haphazard. Like, his speeches are kind of all over the place, and it goes from very high, sort of just like, all right, finally Job is being a little optimistic, and then he will immediately in the next verse like lament and be down in the dumps again. And I kind of see this as, what is God doing with Job? And I think he's doing something similar to Joseph. So Joseph didn't do anything wrong. He was sold into slavery. And in Psalm 105, it describes him as a man being sent on ahead. Because when the famine came, Joseph was sent on ahead in order to be able to save his family. And Joseph says to his brothers, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. And in some ways, I kind of viewed Job as a man sent on ahead, and he's not being led by, some grand plan, some whatever. He's being led by a sense of lack, but also then his interaction with God is a sense of awe. And I really think that as a sense, like this sense of hearing, sense of sight, we have a sense mechanism in us that can perceive awe and wonder, and it guides us just as our sight and hearing. I think that's what brings Job through eventually, finally, and that enables him to then bring everyone with him. And that's kind of how I view the conclusion of it. But any final words?
Yeah, I just thought I'd leave you all with a cliffhanger. We never talked about Leviathan.
Oh,
in the book of
man.
Job.
The whole thing.
We went the whole time without talking about Leviathan.
And what was the other thing I had thought of that we never? Oh, and then there are a lot of birthing metaphors in the book of Job. Because of that, it's always given me, I've always had the sense that the book of Job is about what it means to be born into the world and to become truly human. So that's my final thoughts.
The words of Yosef Rizen.
Thank you. Yeah, we can take
totally.
questions. Okay.
Wait. Where'd you go, Mike?
Yes, I've been interested in the book of Job for a long time. I think that's why Nathan invited me to come. But one of the things as I'm listening to you all talk, you're bringing out points that I didn't notice. You say your name's Yosef? You said that Job took the priestly role, which was not his place. That's what Saul did. That lost him his kingdom. And that crown of righteousness that Job held on his head, maybe that crown fell because what God said to Satan wasn't, you can do what you want. God said, look, the hedge is down. Who dropped the hedge? Was it God or was it Job?
So I do tend to read him as having his integrity throughout the book. I don't think he's a perfect person necessarily, but I don't necessarily know that he's sinned. And this is a complex, right? Like, you don't have to necessarily be perfect to not have sinned, right? There's like a difference there. No human is perfect. We're finite beings. Like, I'm sure he had arguments with his wife and had to deal with parenting like all these kids, and there was a life. Like, he was a real, like, let's take it that he was a real person. I mean, we don't necessarily have to read it that way, but let's say he's a real person. He went through all these real things. But to me, it seems like God drops the hedge. God says, okay, like, I'm going within bounds, right? He says you can't touch certain parts of, right? You can't kill him, right? That was one of the rules. Initially, you couldn't afflict his body, right? So I think it's God dropping the hedge, but it's interesting to connect the hedge to the crown. That'd be cool to explore. Yeah, any view? Sorry.
Secret stress. I also was interested in the crown, and on this one page, I had written it down because it said you said that God said Job asks God to indict him and says, "I'll wear it like a crown." And when I got there, Zohar jumped into my mind, and that whole, because I couldn't remember the thing, but in that diagram that shows up often in Judaism, the crown has a location, it has a purpose, and it has a place. So I was curious because A, I was curious because of that, and B, because there are so many different ways that I think the word crown is used between Judaism and Christianity. And a lot of the talk on Job I've heard has come from only the one direction. And so I'd be very curious about the word crown in relation to Job's interaction with God there.
That's an interesting connection. Yeah, so Keter, one of the Sefirot is the crown, which is where God pierces the darkness of kind of the void that he creates to put creation within his infinitude. It's where it fills. It's like the line of the infinite that pierces the finite. But it has a lot of connections, in fact, to the darkness of Job and maybe flashes of lightning. I could see that's interesting.
Yeah, the lightning for sure.
And it's also, I just quickly looked it up. Crown is used 3 times in the book. Once it says that the Satan afflicts him from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. The second time, Job says, he has removed the crown from my head. He has stripped me of my glory. And then the third time, he says, I wish I could, surely I would carry it upon my shoulder, the indictment. I would bind it unto me as a crown. Right? So, which is also sort of specifically another priestly reference, because the crown or I would call it the diadem of the priest, I don't know how to translate it, that is specifically tied to their head. It's not just like resting on their head with the cords of turquoise. So he wishes in some ways that he was a priest, even here. But it does say, he understands that God removes his crown, whatever that means. So it kind of connects both those. Man, I don't know. Do you have anything to say about crowns, though?
Well,
You're the one who
I
brought it
mean,
up.
the way that my mind works, I immediately go to the poetic relations between that crown, the ketir, and the piercing of the darkness, to the idea of suffering, which of course is Job is laced with, okay, and the crown of thorns that Christ wears on his head. He wears that as a crown, which literally pierces his head. And I think if God was going to pierce my darkness, it would be my head that he would be piercing, because that's where my darkness is.
I'll grab dude. Two quick questions. I'm curious about where, in all your research on the book, what you're persuaded is when relative to the date of the writing of the book.
Sorry. Just me, Shari.
All the above, and also whether is Job a literary figure, or does the writer relaying some historical account of somebody that was the legend of somebody or something like that?
No one knows. I mean, that's the
But I'm really curious about what you were persuaded.
Yeah.
by.
Well, I don't.
Or does it not matter to you?
In some ways it doesn't matter, but there's two kind of basic thoughts. One is that Moses writes it, and it's one of the oldest books. And then the other thought is that it's basically an old story that gets assembled during the exile. So after the temple's destroyed and they go to exile, and you can see, like Yosef already mentioned, how important the book of Job was for those in exile, because they're trying to figure out, the prophets are also telling them what they did wrong, the things that the ways they didn't serve God correctly, the sins they committed. But then there's also this, like, why would God do this anyway? Like, what is the purpose of the suffering servant? So you get these figures. So I mentioned Joseph, who suffers to save his family, but then also you have the suffering servant in Isaiah. You have Jeremiah, who's always complaining. You have, you have all these figures. You have King David. He's always sort of at his best when he's in exile and struggling and fleeing and wandering. So anyway, so those are the two dates, and then I find it's best to think about it in a literary fashion. Like, you got to read the book as a piece of literature, whether you believe Job is a historic man or not, because I mean, it's obvious that it's poetry. So it was written down in such a way, like these. I don't think they gave these speeches and someone was transcribing there with them. It was a work that was done over probably a long time. So
I mostly agree to that. I would just add, I'm pretty sure both Ezekiel and the author of Second Isaiah, whoever that might be, whether it's Isaiah or a later work, is aware of the book of Job. I think there's too many quotes and like direct references, and I think that's the directional causation. There are people who've argued that Job has to be post those books. I think there's reasons with probably not, but I do think they have to be aware of it, which means if the temple's been destroyed, but Ezekiel and Second Isaiah are aware of it, that puts us maybe in the First Kingdom period, or like it could be right after the destruction or the first exile, but not the destruction, right? So there's that 11-year span where Yehonia has been exiled, but the temple hasn't been destroyed yet. So it could be in that span where this is being written. And there's also a question of, is it being written by the Babylonian Jews in Babylon, or are they being written someone in Jerusalem? Clearly it's someone who knows Aramaic, and that's not a given in this period. There's no reason, they were not all speaking Aramaic necessarily. The Assyrians certainly were around and people were speaking it, but whoever's writing this book is using a lot of Aramaicisms. It's not purely a Hebrew book. So and this happens throughout the Bible. Anytime there's a foreign character, Laban in Genesis is also speaking in Aramaicized Hebrew or directly in Aramaic. They do this, and in fact, even the Egyptians they're speaking in Hebrew, but they use a lot of Egyptian terminology. So someone clearly, like however we get Genesis, they know Egyptian, whether it's God dictating to Moses or you believe it's an author, whatever, human author. It has to be someone who knows enough Egyptian to like put the Joseph story together and the Exodus story and make these references in the proper language. So there's something really funky going on in these stories. So I think like dating it is a little hard, and it could be talking about Moses writing it, but like it could be a far older story. When it's actually being written physically, though, I think has to be maybe in those 11 years or something, because it doesn't work otherwise. Oh. Oh.
Yeah, go for it.
He was.
Yeah, yeah. We'll do two.
Okay, he was next.
What did a crown represent in ancient Hebrew?
Oh, gosh. So it's generally associated with beauty and glory, right? You get a lot of like this is the crown of my glory. This is in Isaiah, not surprisingly, because Isaiah is referencing maybe Job or the other way around. They talk about God removing the crown of the daughters of the city of Zion. So it's clearly not specifically just kings and priests, right? There is sort of this, everyone's kind of, when you're kind of in a right relationship maybe, like, and you're participating in this, the nation and properly, right? There is sort of some sort of spiritual crown that everyone has. And there is very old Midrashim about like then everyone being given crowns at Sinai and then losing these crowns with the golden calf, and then kind of the crowns being split up between, the crown being split, right? Authority, right, being split between Moses and Aaron, where or later with David is not the priest. I mean, this goes to what's the name? I don't remember Nate's mom. What your name is? Annie Mae. Thank you. So Annie Mae's point about should Job have been serving as a priest? Like there is this very clear kind of division of powers in First Kingdom biblical kind of politics, but going all the way back to Moses and Aaron. Right, where they're not supposed to have the same role. They're supposed to be separate, and there's reasons for why they have to be separate. It has to be maybe to do their humanity. It has to do with different relationships to God and humanity. Mediators.
Well,
different
part of the
mediators.
reason that I asked is that something that you said made me think about 1 Corinthians 11, where it talks about the woman being the glory of the man, and it makes this statement that a woman should have a symbol of authority on her head. So that doesn't mean that because she has authority, it means the symbol, the hair on her head is a symbol that she's under authority. Then it says the woman is the glory of man, and man is the image and glory of God, which means that man's glory is that he is under the authority of God. That's where the glory comes from, is being under the authority of God. So if the crown represents that the king is under the authority of God, that's what I'm wondering if that's what it means.
So for sure, I mean, that's why I wear this.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I thought about that too.
There's this weird, I don't want to necessarily get into like Pauline, like we can go, this is like a whole rabbit hole.
Well, no, you don't have to reference that. It just made me think about.
No, I know. But so
thing.
certainly kings are under the authority of God. I mean, that's the book of Daniel, the Nebuchadnezzar like stuff is very clear that like when he forgets that he's under the authority of God, God is going to, in fact, causes his crown to wither. The crown, he's compared to a tree, and the crown of the boughs withers when he forgets that, God is supporting him. So there definitely is something to that. Now, like in Orthodox Judaism, both men and women cover their hair, right? So like it's a little bit different than the Pauline kind of conception. And this also goes to Greek and Roman differences in worship, because Romans don't cover their head when they go into a temple, and Greeks do. There's like so there's kind of other weird politics going on in this kind of conversation for Paul. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely something about being under authority. And even like Ezekiel won't even call the future king of Israel king, right? He calls him a prince because he wants, in a king of kings setup, which he believes in, like an empire where there's kings underneath, he doesn't want the future Messiah, to think that he is actually not under God. He won't call him king, which is fascinating, because and he uses the word king. It's like he talks about the current king, who's not good and like doesn't understand his place in the world. But the future king is not called king by Ezekiel. He's very insistent on this point. It's like it's a fascinating kind of political issue. But yeah, that they're always under God, who's the king of kings, right? The proper king of kings.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about or bring up the crown again as well, insofar as I couldn't bear the cliffhanger about Leviathan, about how and about how perhaps the crown is also connected. Insofar as I think I've heard you guys muse a bit about how in the end there's like a feast with Leviathan, or there's like a tent, and there's associations with garments of skin, and how the garments of skin is also like the crown is of course a garment. So I kind of wanted to just hear you guys riff about that a bit, if you could.
What do you want to do about time?
I think we have to go.
I know we're super done.
Okay.
So how about this? We'll have time between things.
Yeah.
Time tomorrow. Okay.
Sure.
So we will set up, not recorded probably, but we'll chat about that.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we'll record it. Yeah.